everyone, welcome or welcome back to my channel. Today is my books I read in March wrap up. So in March I read 24 books. It's a lot of books, I know. I actually thought I was gonna have much less than that, but I hit a really good stride towards the end of the month and I read a ton of books in the last 2 weeks. So a lot of those ones are gonna be in reading vlogs, so if that vlog's not out yet, I think 2 of them will be out. One of them won't be yet, so I'm gonna go through this as quickly as I can because 24 books is gonna take a lot of time to talk through. So for the books that I know that are in vlogs, I'm not gonna talk too long on those. Some stats to start off with: I read 24 books. That's 9,300 pages, 2 nonfiction, 9 thrillers, 2 horror, 4 romance, 5 fantasy, and 2 dystopian. So let's get started going through these. The first book I read was Glossy, which is the Glossier memoir expose. I'm not exactly sure what this book was supposed to be. I did end up rating this 2 stars just because I wasn't clear on what the purpose of the book was. There were times where it felt like it was supposed to be a book about the founder and what she did to get the company to that point and all these good things, and then I feel like the next chapter was just completely ragging on her. So I'm not 100% sure what the point of the book was. It was interesting, but kind of all over the place. So that was the reason for the 2 rating. I don't typically rate nonfiction books, but in this case, because it wasn't a memoir or a biography, I felt like I could rate the content. The second book I read this month was 5 Survive by Holly Jackson. This is a YA thriller. It's about 6 friends that go on this road trip for spring break, and their camper gets a flat tire and they end up on the side of the road and then are basically hunted. So there's one person in the RV that I don't know what you want to call them, the assassins are looking for. There's a target. And the whole time they're trying to figure out who it is. They all have secrets, so secrets are coming out, but it's really just one person that they're looking for. Super fast paced, super short chapters, and the book's broken out hour by hour because essentially the people that are hunting them give them a time frame that they have to basically turn this person over that they're looking for. Won't tell them who it is, but that's the time frame that the book kind of ticks down to. I thought it was a fun, interesting way to do a mystery thriller. I do enjoy YA mysteries. I loved the Good Girl's Guide to Murder by Holly Jackson, so I did pick this one up when I saw it. I think I got this one on Book Outlet, so I didn't even pay too much for it, which was great. The next book I read was All the Little Raindrops by Mia Sheridan. This is a romance book, and I don't know if I'd call it a dark romance book, but it does have darker themes. It's about 2 people that are essentially kidnapped and put through this really horrific experience together, and they trauma bond, I guess you could say, throughout it, and they do develop this attachment to each other because of it. So it's not the healthiest relationship, and then from there it goes through their lives, them reconnecting over time. There's a few different periods of time and deciding if they want to have a relationship or if it's really healthy or not. This was a difficult read. I would definitely look up the trigger warnings. I don't know that they're in the front of the book. No, there's no trigger warnings in the front of the book, but I would definitely look up trigger warnings for this one. I ended up rating this a 3.25 with a 2.5 spice rating. It did get a little spicy at times, not too crazy, but it was interesting because it was different than a romance novel, but it didn't really feel like a romance novel, if that makes sense. Next, I read The Bizaar of Bad Dreams by Stephen King. This is a compilation of his short stories, so there's a whole bunch of different types of stories in here. This is considered horror, but it is also considered literary fiction. And I'd say that there are some stories in here that I would consider literary fiction, but there are some that are definitely more towards the horror end of things. I had a few in here that I really liked, and I had a few in here that I wasn't a huge fan of. He does write poetry as well, and there were a few poems in here. Not my favorite. I'm not really a poetry reader. The rest of the stories were all interesting in their own ways. The nice thing about this book, too, was that he also gave you a little bit of an insight onto the short story before he tells you it. So there's a page or a page and a half between each story talking about the next one and the inspiration for it and how he wrote it and just his inspirations for writing in general, which I thought was pretty interesting. So you got a little bit of a little personal touch to this too, and I did enjoy that. I rated this a 3.75 just because it wasn't a full story, so it was hard to be attached to characters or a story in general, but I did very much enjoy this. Then I decided to pick up The Hurricane Wars by Thea Guanzon. This book was so much better than I thought it was going to be. I was really scared going into it because I had heard some people really didn't like it. I loved it, and then I heard, I can't remember who it was, I was watching somebody's video, and I think they were picking this for a TBR, and they said they'd been putting it aside because they heard it was like based, I don't want to say based on Star Wars, but it had like Star Wars feels to it, which is why I probably loved it. Had I known that, I would have picked this up so much faster. But I ended up giving this 4 stars with a 2.5 spice rating. It is a fantasy romance novel, adult fantasy romance novel, and it's about these 2 different sides of this war. A girl that's finding out that she has like connections to these powers that haven't been seen for like years because they thought they were extinct, and they're like the opposite powers to these other people who are basically running the new order, I guess I would call it. Like that would be what you'd call it in Star Wars. And then like she's part of like the rebellion, and of course then there's like obviously an attraction between him and her, and they're trying to figure out exactly what's going on in the world. There are people that have like other powers, and there's definitely a lot more that's going to come out of this. I don't want to go too much into detail because I think you should read this if that sounds interesting to you. If a like Star Wars fantasy-esque romance book sounds good to you, this is it. I'm very excited for the next one that comes out. I don't remember the month, but it's this year. I think it's called the Monsoon something. But it's coming out this year, and I'm definitely going to be picking that up as soon as it comes out because I can't wait to continue this story. The next book I picked up was One of Us is Lying by Karen M. McManus. This is another YA thriller mystery book about these 5 students that are all in detention one day, and during detention, one of the students dies. And the rest of the book is basically unraveling this mystery of like which one of them killed him, why, what their motives were, his history and all of that, because he wasn't necessarily the greatest person. It just kind of unravels from there. They have to either choose to stand together and figure out what happened or turn on each other. I did kind of predict what happened. It still unraveled a little differently than I thought it would, but there was definitely a point in time towards the beginning of the book that I was like, I wonder if this is what happened. And it is what happened. So, but there was a lot to this. There was a lot about like their secrets and stuff that you just didn't know because you had no idea what secret was going to be revealed about each of them. But the overall premise I did guess. Still very much enjoyed the book. I gave it 3.75 stars. There was a little bit of spice, but not too much. So I gave it like half a spice rating. Later in the month, and this is the vlog that probably is not out yet, I did continuing a series vlog, and I picked up One of Us is Next. This is the sequel to this book. There is also one more out, at least right now. I think it's called One of Us is Back. I don't have that yet. I also gave this a 3.75, and I gave this one a 1 spice rating because it got a little bit spicier. Not too bad though. It is YA, so it's not too crazy. This one follows the same kind of group of students, but one of the main characters in the first book's little sister, she's also in the first book. She's part of how they solved the mystery. This is like her generation dealing with it, so I think they're like a year or 2 younger. So a lot of the same characters from the first book are back in this one, but then there's also like side characters from the first book that are actually the primary characters in this one. And it is more secrets, kind of similar but still different. But the premise is still the same. It's somebody that's leaking secrets, and then a death happens and it's linked to that. So I enjoyed both of these a lot. I am going to pick up One of Us is Back, probably when it comes out in paperback. I think it's only in hardback right now, but I recommend these if you like a mystery thriller, if you enjoyed Good Girls Guide to Murder, if you enjoyed the Natural series, stuff like that. It is very good YA reads, I think. Next, I picked up Stephen King's Fairy Tale. This is a fantasy novel for Stephen King, which is not his typical genre, I would say. It has been, I think, more in recent years, but he is the king of horror, so most of his books border on the line of horror than fantasy, even if they do have a fantastical element, which I have talked about before when I talked about Stephen King. Typically, though, there is some scientific explanation for those fantastical elements. This book, however, is fantasy. So it is about a boy who stumbles across this older man that lives in his town one day and ends up helping him, and he develops a friendship with him. And there's this like shed in the backyard that like weird things are happening around. And when the old man is unable to like basically take care of himself anymore, and he's, crippled and everything, this kid has to take over, and he finds this like magical world in this shed. So there's a lot more to it than that, but I don't want to give away the whole like premise of the story. but it is this kid and the dog, whose name, oh, Radar. I was like, I can't remember the dog's name. Charlie and Radar are the two main characters in this book, and they're the ones that kind of go in this magical world, and it really reminded me of like Oz in a way. There were definitely some elements to that were Wizard of Oz, which I love. If you can't tell, I have this like Wizard of Oz like art piece. I have multiple copies of that book. It's one of my favorite stories, one of my favorite books, one of my favorite movies. So the elements to that in here were really interesting to me. And it was definitely a different type of read for Stephen King for me. I ended up giving this 4 stars and 0 spice. But if you're not into the horror elements of him, I would say a little bit of horror in here based on some of the characters, but nothing like some of his other books. This is definitely like a way to step into his kind of writing style and his mind. So highly recommend if you're not into the horror side of things. Next, I read These Violent Delights by Chloe Gong. This book is in a reading blog, so I won't go too detailed into it, but one of my favorite reads of the month. There were probably 3 that were my top 3. I don't think I could pick through, and they're the next 3 books I'm going to talk about. This is a Romeo and Juliet reimagining, I would say, and it takes place in like 1920s Shanghai, and it's these 2 rival gangs, and there's this like monster that's attacking both gangs. And then the daughter of the one and the son of the other, Romeo and Juliet, it's actually Roma and Juliet in this. They're trying to figure out what's going on to save their people, but their parents don't really want them involved and they don't really believe what's happening right away. Again, Romeo and Juliet. So I really, really enjoyed this book, and I cannot wait to read These Violent Ends. And I think it's actually on Kindle Unlimited right now. I think this one and These Violent Ends is on Kindle Unlimited, so I may read that before I buy the actual book because it doesn't come out in paperback till June. And I really want to read this while it's still fresh in my mind, the second one. Did I say it's Our Violent Ends? I can't remember what I called it. It's Our Violent Ends. So, highly recommend this book. It took me forever to pick this up because I did see a lot of people talk about it, but I highly recommend this one. It's been out and been around the block, but if you have not read this series yet, I have a feeling the second one's going to be even better than this one. I gave this 4.5 stars and a half a spice rating. There is a romance in here. Obviously, it is fantasy. Very much enjoyed. I can't talk enough about this, but I don't want to say too much. I did have this in a vlog, so if you want a little bit more thoughts on it, you can watch that vlog. The next book I read was Holly by Stephen King. It was a heavy Stephen King month. This is his newest release, barring the one that's coming out May or June, I think, which is another short story compilation, so it's not a novel. This book is about Holly Gibney, who is a character that's been in previous books. Again, this was in a vlog, so if you want my full thoughts on it, go there. But basically, Holly works for Finders Keepers, which is like a detective agency, a private detective agency, and she helps people solve crimes, find people, the like. And people are going missing in this town, and she's called by this mother whose daughter has gone missing to find her. And she ends up stumbling across these like weird people in town and eventually finds out what's really going on in their home that's being like kind of hidden. I don't know. I don't want to give this away. This was a really good book. Definitely made me think of like he's going back to his roots a little bit with this, with the mystery horror aspect. I would search up your trigger warnings for this because I did not. Again, you're going to have to look online. Some of the things that happen in here are things that tend to actually bother me. And I stomached through them, but because I love Holly Gibney as a character and I wanted to get through it and I was enjoying the story, but there are some pretty startling things in this book. So, again, highly recommend. It was one of those books where like you know what's happening as the reader because you're seeing like the killer's perspective and the detective's perspective, so you're just waiting for her to figure out what's happening, so it's so frustrating. I really enjoyed this one. Might be one of my favorite reads of his. I've only read like 13 of his books, so I have a long way to go, but so far definitely high up there, definitely top 3. I don't know if I said what I rated this, but I gave it a 4.5 and 0 spice. This next book was also in a reading vlog. It is Red Queen by Victoria Aveyard. I was afraid to read this book because a lot of people said that after they read Powerless, this just didn't hit that hard because Lauren Roberts used this book as inspiration for Powerless. I definitely see the similarities, but this is still different. It is still its own book. And while they are both YA, I believe this is YA, I know Powerless is. This one read a little older to me. This one read a little bit more mature than Powerless. the characters in general just were a little bit more mature, I think, than the ones in Powerless. I loved Powerless, don't get me wrong. I'm so excited. I bought the novella that's coming out at the end of April, and I have Reckless already pre-ordered. I will be continuing that series, but I will also be continuing this series because I really enjoyed this book. I gave this 4.75 stars, so this was actually my highest rated book this month. I did not have a 5-star read this month, but this was very, very close for me. I loved the characters, I loved the story arc, and I am so excited to see where the rest of this series goes. I do not have the next book yet. I'm on a book buying ban, but the next book in this, I think, is Glass Sword. So it will be one of the books that I'm prioritizing purchasing once I'm allowed to in 3 weeks. I have 3 weeks left. Again, this isn't a vlog. There is a little bit of spice in this. I think I rated it like 1.5 spice. So it is YA, so it's not too crazy. Next, I read Dolly Parton and James Patterson's Run, Rose, Run. This is a Dolly Parton album, I believe. Theirs goes by this title. And this is a mystery thriller about a girl that shows up in Nashville trying to start a music career. She's just going from like bar to bar trying to get these people to like let her play open mics and then eventually be paid for it, and ends up meeting this guy who knows a woman whose name is like Ruth Anna, who is in the music industry, big popular like country star, like country queen, owns the bar that she actually walks into to try to get an open mic night, and he's in her band that helps record music at her home studio. So he ends up introducing Rose to Ruth Anna, and Ruth Anna basically takes Rose's career to the next level. But all this time, like, you're getting snippets like of her past, and like you know that she's running from something, hiding from something, and that there's somebody like stalking her. So that obviously all unravels at some point in the book. It was a really cute, fun read. I've never read a James Patterson book, and while yes, this isn't just him, this was obviously co-written by Dolly Parton, which is why I bought it. I did really enjoy it. It was a fast-paced thriller, nothing extreme. Like, I didn't really know exactly what was going on with her, but you get enough Easter eggs throughout to kind of figure it out. So, but it was an interesting read. I did enjoy it. 3.25 stars, which is above average for me. And there was a little bit of spice, so I gave it a 1 on the spice rating. Next, I read Louise Penny's Madness of Crowds. This was another COVID book. I did not know that picking it up, but it was about this woman. This I think took place in like Quebec, Canada, that kind of area. And it happens after the pandemic, and there's this woman going around kind of saying very controversial things about what she thinks the medical industry needs to do to deal with coming out of COVID and the money that's been lost and the lack of space in hospitals and whatnot. So it opens at like a rally that she's, not a rally, but it was like a speech that ends up being a little bit too crazy. There's like an attempt on her life at that. So from there, the police are trying to figure it out. This is like book 20 or something in a series about Agent Gamache, or like Sergeant Gamache, who's like the police chief in this. And he's like trying to figure it out. His whole family's involved. And then there actually is a murder that's connected, so they're just trying to figure out that the whole time, and there's just a lot of characters, and it was interesting, but not my favorite. I only gave this 2.5 stars, 0 spice. I think part of it has to do with the fact that I've not read the first 20 books in this series, or whatever it is. This is pretty far along, and I didn't know the characters that well, I think, to really feel for them, and there were just so many characters, which probably wouldn't have felt so extreme had I been like reading books about them. But I feel like I was trying to learn the family and the extended family and all of the police people, plus like the 27 people involved in this particular case. It was just a lot. A lot of it also just felt like really, really repetitive. So the ending was a little shocking, but I don't know, like they just kept going back and forth, and it was so confusing at times because like accusing people of something and they were kind of admitting to it, and then they were like, nope, actually this is what happened. Very confusing, but I know she's like a very well-known author. A lot of people like her books. It just wasn't for me. Take with that what you will. Again, these are my opinions. Everybody has different opinions. I've loved books that people have hated, and I've disliked books people have loved. So if this sounds interesting to you, definitely pick it up. This was another Ollie's find, so I didn't spend a ton of money on it, so I'm not too upset about it, and it's a beautiful cover. I just love the colors, but not my favorite read. The next book I read was Behind the Seams, My Life in Rhinestones, which is a Dolly Parton book as well. It was the month of Dolly Parton too. I got this from the library, not realizing that it's like essentially a coffee table book. And it's just a kind of a biography of her clothes and her evolution of style and like why she chooses to dress the way that she does, and how she doesn't really care what people say about her and all of that. And you get to talk to the different designers that she's worked with over the years and the one she's working with now, and they go through the different eras of her life and the different albums that she did and the outfits that she wore for important events. And it was really interesting, but I read it on my Kindle and all the pictures are black and white. So that was a little disappointing, but I did like, you did get snippets of like her childhood and who she took style, I guess, like inspiration from, which was kind of interesting. I won't spoil that. If you want to look it up, I'm sure you can find it somewhere, but it's kind of funny. And I just love Dolly, and there was definitely a lot of aspects of her in this. I just wish I would have been able to read it in like color, but my sister did say that she wants to buy the coffee table book. It's huge. We did look at it in Target the other day, and it's beautiful, and I did look at some of the pictures of the outfits I really wanted to see, but I didn't realize it was like a coffee table book, so it took like no time at all to read. I'm not gonna rate that, but I did read that, and it was interesting. So if you like Dolly Parton, if you think clothes and people's style choices are interesting, get a cool book for your coffee table and sit there and read some things when you're bored. Next I have The Girl from Widow Hills by Megan Miranda. I like Megan Miranda's writing. I own quite a few of her books, and she has one coming out in April that I plan on getting on vacation. Daughter of Mine. And I want to say it's about like a girl whose mother goes missing and then like comes back. I can't remember exactly. But Widow Hills is about this girl that was like swept away in a storm as a child and became like this hometown story, national story, because they ended up finding her. And then years later, she kind of moves away from everything because she was bullied and had like creepy stalkers contacting her. So she starts over in this new town with a new name, and one night wakes up outside and there's a dead body outside her house. It ends up being, I'm gonna make sure this is said on the back. Okay, so yes, the man is connected to her old life. So it does say on the back, it's not a spoiler. So then it's a mystery of who killed him, how'd he die, why was he there, like miles and miles away from where she grew up, like why was he in her yard in the middle of nowhere, how did he end up dead? And this was actually really fast paced, very interesting. I didn't really see it coming kind of book, so that's always great in a thriller. I gave this 4 stars, which might be the highest I've ever rated a Megan Miranda novel. They're all usually like, nothing's been below a 3, but I really did enjoy this one. I thought there were a lot of good twists in it and a lot of like good information that came out that you didn't really see coming. So if you like a fast-paced fun thriller, highly recommend this one. Next up is Shatter Me by Tahara Mafi. This is the first book in the Shatter Me series. It's about a girl named Juliet who is like 17 years old or something, and it opens with her in a prison because she has this, it is a power, I guess. Like when people touch her, they feel pain, and like she can kill people by touching them. Her touch is essentially lethal. Oh, yeah, it says my touch is lethal right there, and it's crossed out. And there are a lot of like cool aspects to this book because Mafi does like cross out things throughout the book, and it's intentional because you're supposed to just kind of see the chaos of Juliet's mind and the things she wants to say versus the things she does say, or the things she wants to think versus what she tells herself she should think. And essentially the government, this is another like New Order rebellion kind of book. Like there's this new revolutionary order, reestablishment order, who is trying to run the world as like one unit. Like all of the countries kind of are under like one leader, even though they have different leaders for different sectors. They're all like one government, and like the world is basically trash. So I don't know how else to say it, but like resources are gone, animals are dying. It's dystopian, so it's obviously supposed to be like sometime in the future. And the reestablishment wants to take her out of this prison and use her as a weapon against the rebellion. And you know how that's probably gonna end up, right? It's not gonna work out for them. So I enjoyed like seeing the evolution of Juliet and like becoming more confident in herself and her abilities, but still struggling because she's obviously lived 17 years of her life without being able to be touched or comforted or anything. So I can't imagine. I am not a touchy-feely person, but I still can't imagine like not being able to get a hug from somebody because you could kill them. So there's a lot of that. There's a lot of struggles with that. I rated this 3.75 and 1.5 on the spice rating. It is kind of slow because you're learning the whole world, but I expected the rest of the series to speed up. and I just recently finished Unravel, which is the second book in the series, and I really enjoyed this one. I gave it 4 stars. It is a little bit spicier than the first one, but still, I think these are still considered YA, so they're not too crazy. And it picks up right where the first one left off, so I can't really go into what's going on, but it definitely had more action. It was faster paced. There's a lot more character development. There's a lot more, you're learning a lot more about characters. There's a specific character in Shatter Me that I hated that I now love in this one. And I kind of knew that was going to happen at some point, but I didn't see how it was going to happen because I hated him so much in this, but I didn't know I was going to like him in this one. So, a lot of changes, but first 2 books of the Shatter Me series were also read this month. Unravel Me is also in a vlog that is not out yet, so stay tuned for that. This is in a vlog as well. I read Good Bad Girl by Alice Feeney. This was the last Alice Feeney book I had to read to get caught up on her backlog. However, not my favorite of hers. I gave this 3.25 stars. It is about how do I want to describe this? You can watch the vlog that'll be out. That is out. That one is out. It's the like reading blindly choosing my TBR for a week, I think it is, something like that. There was a baby like taken years ago, like 20 years ago, and now like we're 20 years past that in the present time, and there's a murder, and you're just trying to figure out how these 2 things are connected, and you're following 4 main characters, Patience, Frankie, Cleo, and Edith, and they're all connected, but you don't really know how at the beginning. However, I did kind of guess what happened about 20 pages into this book. I could tell you what the ending was going to be. And honestly, I don't know if I said this in the vlog, but thinking about what I read in Stephen King's The Bizaar of Bad Dreams and how he writes his stories, he says he likes to go into his books, his novels, his stories without knowing what the ending's going to be, because he thinks if he's writing it and he knows what the ending's going to be, everyone reading it will know what the ending's supposed to be. And that's how I felt with this book. So while the story was really interesting and the ties between everybody and like what actually happened and all the little details were very intricately woven, I think it was, for me, it was pretty obvious early on what was going to happen. So that is why it had a little bit of a lower rating, but I still enjoyed the characters, I still enjoyed the story, so that's why it was still above a 3-star. Also in that reading vlog is Rogue Justice by Stacey Abrams. The beginning of this book opens in a very similar way to Cassidy Hutchinson, that whole situation. So if you know what that is, you should know pretty much how this book opens, but we're following Avery, who is essentially the Cassidy in this situation, and she ends up getting, I guess this is the second book in a series, and I didn't know that. You don't need to read the first book to pick up on this. They explain and over-explain everything, so it's fine. This is about Avery getting involved in another case because somebody comes and finds her because of all the publicity that she got from the case that I guess was in the previous book that this one starts with, and that she's like not afraid to basically like stick it to the system because she's finding stuff that's wrong. That's kind of all I can say about this, other than the fact that like every agency that I've ever heard of in the government is included in this, so there are times where it's just like you're reading acronym after acronym after acronym, and it gets a little much at times. Heavy legal thriller. The story itself was fascinating and interesting, and I learned a lot that I probably wouldn't have known about certain, can I say that? I guess. So like what agencies are allowed to do when they're spying on you and like wiretapping and all kind of stuff. I learned a lot about that, and I'm assuming it's accurate because she is involved in politics in the government and understands that stuff. So it may be exaggerated. Obviously it's a thriller and it's fiction. If you're okay reading government acronyms and learning the backstory of every single person that you meet in this, regardless of the amount of time that they need to be in this book, this one's for you. But I did give this a 3.25 because I did enjoy the story. It was different than something that I've ever read because it was a legal thriller, and I'm not a big legal thriller reader. But again, full thoughts are in a reading vlog, so if you want more on that, check that one out. Also in that reading vlog was Runaway Love by Melanie Harlow. This is about a woman who is supposed to get married and then finds out something about her husband that day and ends up running away from her wedding. And she's in this like small vacation town that the wedding's taking place in, that her rich fiance's family always vacations in, and just wants to get away from him. Ends up running into this girl at a diner and is like, she said, hey, I have to leave my brother for the summer, but he needs a nanny. I have a perfect job for you. So that's where it starts. Single dad, nanny, small town, romance. And I think it was a little too insta-lovey for me. and very spicy. Like, it was pure smut. Like I said in the reading vlog, sometimes you just need that. I hadn't had a real romance all month, so it hit at the right moment for me. But if you don't like spice, don't read this. That's all I have to say. It was a pretty typical, like, single dad nanny trope, like, we shouldn't be hooking up, but we're attracted to each other, so we're going to, kind of thing. So 3 stars, 3.5 on the spice, which is pretty high for me to rate a book on spice. So take that what you will. I did enjoy it, but I'm also not bothered by that kind of stuff. So if you are, don't read it. And the last book from that vlog was I Like Me Better by Susan Renee. This was about 2 like college rivals who lost touch because she didn't come back for their senior year, but they're from the same small town, just like went to different grade schools, high schools, whatever. They didn't know each other until college. Beckham lives in Chicago now and he's an accountant, but Hadley is still back home. And he doesn't know that until he goes back because his father died and he has to help take care of the family business and figure out if they want to keep or sell the bakery that his dad ran. Goes home. Hadley's the manager of the bakery, so he has to deal with her. And there's still like animosity between them, even though they both were super attracted to each other in college, and the like rivalry thing was just because of the attraction to each other. They figure that out pretty quick. He wants to have like a friendship with her, wants to have a relationship with her, but they're both so broken and are going through so many things that it's hard for them to accept trying to be together as well. This was a little more slow burny than I was expecting, considering this cover. It did get spicy towards the end, but it wasn't a ton of the book, which was kind of nice, especially coming off of an extremely smutty book. There was definitely more of an emotional connection in this for them, and slower burn. Like, it took longer to get to the smut. So I enjoy that. I like a slow burn. I don't care if you want to give me spice, but make them work for it. So I gave this a 3 star and a 3 on the spice because once it got spicy, it was spicy. Next, and this is part of the reading vlog that isn't out yet, I read City of Ashes by Cassandra Clare, which is the 2nd book in the Mortal Instruments series. I have read this series a long time ago, high school or college. I can't remember when this came out. This book is the first series, is part of the first series in the Shadowhunters universe. And I am trying to read that whole series this year, so I was happy to pick this one up because it's only book 2 in the long list of books I have to read, like 20 some books I have to read for that. This one was definitely more interesting than the first one. Again, in a fantasy series, you're going to have a boring first book unless it's a standalone because there's a lot of world building. I remembered that this one got a little bit more involved, more high stakes, and it did live up to that. So this was a 3.5 for me. Again, not super high rated for me, but I still enjoyed it, and I'm excited to read the Shadowhunters books that I haven't read yet, so that will be a stay tuned for when I get there. If you don't know about the Shadowhunters universe, it's these teenage demon hunters essentially in the Mortal Instruments in the present, I'd say present time. The Mortal Instruments takes place in the present time. Clary is like the main character, and in the first book she discovers that she's actually the daughter of 2 Shadowhunters. She has no idea that this world exists, so the first book is a lot of her discovering that world and where she fits in and the internal war that's going on, and this is just a continuation of that. Also part of that vlog is Powerless, which is the 3rd book in the Chestnut Spring series by Elsie Silver. It is a hockey ballerina romance. He's a NHL hockey goalie, and she is a prima ballerina, and they are childhood friends to best friends to lovers. So our 2 main characters are Jasper and Sloane. You meet Jasper in the first 2 books in Chestnut Springs, but you just meet Sloane in Heartless, which is the 2nd one, briefly. As soon as you meet her, you know that her and Jasper have feelings for each other. And basically when you meet her in Heartless, it's announced that she's getting married and that she's engaged, and Jasper's like, I'm sorry, what? So this book picks up with her wedding. I think it actually starts at her rehearsal dinner, and then it goes into her wedding day. Things happen. Obviously she doesn't get married or we wouldn't have a romance between her and Jasper, and he's kind of her knight in shining armor, and they end up spending time together because there's another family crisis that happens where they're spending time together to make sure the other doesn't go crazy. And in typical friends to lovers, where you know that they're both attracted to each other because you're reading their point of views, there's a breaking point and it kind of all comes out from there. Jasper is very damaged. I don't want to say damaged, but emotionally damaged from things that happened in his childhood. So obviously Sloane knows all about that because they've known each other since they were kids, but helping him cope with that and deal with that and move on from that and want to be loved and trust and all of that stuff is basically the moral of this book. So I enjoyed this one. I gave it 3.5 stars, 3 spice. I liked it. The Chestnut Springs books have been, I think, like 3.5, 3.75. I think I rated Heartless a little higher because I really liked that book, which is weird because it was a single dad book and that's not typically what I like. But I really liked Kate. So I recommend that series. I'm not a huge romance reader. I do read romance, but not as avidly as I read like thrillers and fantasy books. So if I give something higher than a 3, if I give it a 3, it's perfectly fine. If I give it higher than a 3, I really liked it. And the final book I read, which is also in that vlog that's not out yet, is The Wicked King by Holly Black, which is the second book in the Cruel Prince trilogy. I don't know what it's called. It's the trilogy with the Cruel Prince being the first book. I did not love the first book. I did not like Cardan, and I didn't understand how people grew to like him. And I thought the first book didn't have a lot of action in it, so I think I only gave it like 3 stars. And I own this book and I own The Queen of Nothing, which is the third book, so I'm going to finish it. But this one's definitely better, in my opinion. It was higher stakes, more was going on, you're learning more about the characters. Jude is your main female character and just basically kind of the main character of the series. Cardan's the main male character, I think going to be the love interest. And I didn't understand how that was going to happen in the first book. I'm seeing it a little bit in this book, but I don't love the relationship. And that's not a spoiler because it talks about her and Cardan on the back and having feelings for each other. I think it's a weird situation. So that's just my opinion on it. This was 3.5 stars for me. Again, I think the first one I only rated 3 stars, but the action and the story in this were what made it a better read to me. But I'm still not a huge fan of the characters themselves. So maybe that'll all change in The Queen of Nothing. I don't know. Hopefully we'll find out next month. Maybe I'll try to prioritize that so I could be done with the series. Okay, and that is it. That is a lot of books. My TBR for next month is out already. Let me know if you've read any of these books, if you have any thoughts on them, what your thoughts were on them, if you have any recommendations for me based on the books that I read this month, and let me know your thoughts about TBR for next month, because I don't want to do the blindly choosing my TBR again. I think I want to do something different, and I'm throwing a few things around. I'm trying not to go back to the TBR jar. I'm trying to come up with ways that I can't really pick them myself. So I'm throwing a few things around, but just like let me know what you guys think about that, because you seem to have really liked what I've done the last 2 months. So I think that's all I have to say about this one, and if you've made it this far, thank you, and I will see you all in the next video.